Have you ever bitten into a sandwich chain sub and thought this is the kind of meal to avoid at all costs, except for maybe the rare two that are actually worth it? Picture limp lettuce, bread that tastes like packing foam, and a sandwich that barely fills you up. But hidden between the disappointments are a couple of spots still stacking subs with care. Curious if your favorite made the cut? Let's kick things off with the so-called king of subs that talks freshness, but often leaves you with soggy bread and tired toppings. Subway. Walk into a Subway and the promise is right there on the wall. Eat fresh. It is a slogan so ingrained that you can almost hear the jingle before you even pick up the menu. And sure, the bread is baking in the oven, the toppings are laid out neatly in bins, and you have the power to build your own sub. At first glance, it feels like a win, but the first bite often tells a different story. The bread, which should be the star of a sandwich, has a strange spongy texture. It is soft in a way that feels artificial, and it does not hold up once sauces hit it. By the time you reach the halfway mark, the bottom of the bread is collapsing and the whole thing is sliding out of your hands. Instead of a sub, you are holding a sloppy mess wrapped in paper. Then there are the toppings. The lettuce looks tired, shredded so thin it feels like confetti, and it wilts under the heat of the bread. Tomatoes are often pale, more water than flavor, and cucumbers taste like they just came out of a storage bin. The meats, sliced paper thin and prepackaged, rarely taste fresh. Turkey is bland, ham is salty, and the so-called steak is chewy and tastes like it was microwaved minutes before it hit your sandwich. Subway tries to mask these issues with sauces. Honey mustard, chipotle southwest, ranch, all piled on to give the illusion of flavor. But more often than not, those sauces overpower everything else, leaving you with a sandwich that tastes like condiments and bread, not a real meal. And then there is the price. For what you get, it is not as cheap as it once was. A footlong that used to feel like a deal now costs close to $10 or more in many locations. Add chips and a drink, and suddenly, you are paying almost as much as you would for a meal at a sit-down restaurant. The biggest disappointment with Subway is that it has all the pieces to be good. Fresh vegetables, customizable sandwiches, an easy setup. But it cuts corners at every step. You leave full but never satisfied, and that is the worst kind of meal. So tell me, have you ever ordered a fresh sub only to realize it tasted more like soggy salad on bread? Sliding into the list is the sandwich shop that brags about speed but serves up thin meats and flavorless bread, Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's built its name on being freaky fast. Delivery so quick you barely have time to blink, and a reputation for convenience that made it a favorite among college kids, office workers, and late-night snackers. But speed is not the same as quality. And when you peel back the paper wrapper, you often find a sandwich that feels more rushed than rewarding. The bread is the first letdown. It is plain, dense, and more like a dry baguette than a soft sub roll. Instead of complementing the fillings, it dominates them. Every bite is mostly bread with just a hint of whatever meats or vegetables are tucked inside. And speaking of the fillings, this is where the disappointment really sets in. Jimmy John's prides itself on all natural meats and cheeses, but thin slices mean skimpy portions. Turkey, roast beef, ham, they all taste fine, but they never stand out. You get 1 or 2 bites of meat followed by mouthfuls of dry bread and lettuce. The cheese is hardly noticeable and the vegetables are forgettable at best. Iceberg lettuce that crunches like water, tomatoes that are hit or miss, and onions that do little more than sting your eyes. To make matters worse, Jimmy John's keeps its menu simple to a fault. Where other chains offer hot subs, specialty sauces, or toasted bread, here it is cold sandwiches with little flair. The only real options are adding mayonnaise or mustard, and maybe a splash of oil and vinegar. The result is a sandwich that tastes unfinished, like someone forgot to add the flavor. Price-wise, Jimmy John's is not outrageous, usually around $8 to $10 for a sub. But when you compare it to competitors that load their sandwiches high, it feels like a weak deal. The speed is impressive, yes, but what good is fast food if it never makes you want to come back for seconds? Jimmy John's might win points for convenience, but it loses in flavor. And in a world where people expect more from their sandwiches, that is a recipe for disappointment. What do you think? Is a fast sandwich worth it if it never leaves you satisfied? Or would you rather wait a few extra minutes for something with real flavor? Next up is the once toasty darling that flamed out with more gimmicks than greatness: Quiznos. There was a time when Quiznos felt like the future of sandwiches. The ovens were front and center, the bread came out warm and toasty, and the commercials made it seem like every sub was a masterpiece. Compared to cold, floppy sandwiches from other chains, Quiznos was a game changer. But that shine did not last long. The toasting gimmick wore thin once people realized the bread was often dry and overdone. Toasting can bring flavor, sure, but it can also make bread brittle. Instead of holding fillings together, the crust crumbled and the insides fell out. You got shards of bread that scratched the roof of your mouth, and toppings that slid onto your plate before you could finish. And speaking of toppings, Quiznos never quite nailed balance. The meats were better than some chains, but still far from deli quality. Roast beef was salty, turkey was bland, and ham was overly processed. Add in sauces, chipotle, ranch, honey mustard, and suddenly you were eating a sandwich that was all sauce, no substance. The vegetables, meanwhile, felt like an afterthought. Lettuce wilted under the heat of the oven, tomatoes cooked into mush, and onions lost their bite. The price also worked against Quiznos. Coming in next is the bold-sounding chain where sauces smother everything until you forget the meat was supposed to matter: Firehouse Subs. Firehouse Subs has always leaned into a theme. The decor screams firehouse pride, with walls covered in firefighter helmets, hoses, and memorabilia. The menu names sound heroic: Hook and Ladder, Engine Company, Smokehouse Beef, and Cheddar Brisket. It makes you feel like you are about to bite into something strong, hearty, and full of flavor. But the truth is, many of these sandwiches rely less on quality meat and more on drowning everything in sauce. Take the Hook and Ladder, for example. On paper, it is turkey breast, ham, melted cheese, and a blend of sauces. In practice, it is so heavy with mayonnaise and mustard that the meat barely registers. The turkey is watery, the ham is overly salty, and both are sliced so thin they fold into the bread and disappear. By the time you finish, all you taste is bread soaked in condiments. The Smokehouse Beef and Cheddar Brisket sounds mouth-watering. Who would not want slow-smoked brisket in a sandwich? But when you try it, you realize it is more barbecue sauce than brisket. The meat is soft but flavorless, the smokiness is faint, and the sauce dominates everything. A sandwich like this should be bold, smoky, and meaty. Instead, it is sticky, sweet, and one-note. The bread is another weakness. It is often soft to the point of soggy, collapsing under the weight of all that sauce. Pick up a hot sandwich and the bread tears before you even take a bite. A good sub roll should be sturdy, able to hold fillings together without falling apart. At Firehouse Subs, it feels like bread is just the delivery system for condiments. Then there is the price. For a medium sub, you are paying close to $10 to $12. Add chips and a drink, and you are easily spending $15. At that price, you expect a sandwich that makes you nod with satisfaction after every bite. But more often than not, you leave feeling like you paid for bread and sauce instead of meat. Firehouse Subs has a loyal following, and it is easy to see why the theme works. The branding is strong, the shops feel inviting, and the names make you smile. But if you strip away the firefighter decorations, what you are left with is a sandwich that too often misses the mark. So here's the question. Do you like your sandwiches bold with meat and flavor, or covered in so much sauce that everything tastes the same? Rolling into the mix is the cozy-sounding shop that too often skimps on fillings and serves dry bread for a premium price. Potbelly Sandwich Shop. Potbelly Sandwich Shop tries to sell nostalgia. From the moment you walk in, you are greeted with old-fashioned decor, warm lighting, and sometimes even live music in the corner. It is meant to feel like a step back in time, a cozy lunch spot where sandwiches are made with care. The problem is, once you sit down with your food, the illusion fades quickly. The bread is the first letdown. Potbelly loves its multi-grain and white rolls, but they are dry and crumbly more often than not. Instead of a soft bite with just enough chew, you get bread that feels stale halfway through your meal. And because the bread is oversized compared to the fillings, every bite feels like a mouthful of bread with just a whisper of meat and cheese. Speaking of fillings, Potbelly portions are skimpy. A turkey sandwich should be piled high with meat. At Potbelly, you get a few thin slices that look like they came straight from a grocery store deli pack. The roast beef is no better, thin, chewy, and lacking flavor. Cheese is minimal, barely melted, and does little to add richness. Even their toasted sandwiches fail to shine because the bread dries out even more under the heat. Vegetables should balance things out, but they rarely do. The lettuce is shredded so thin it feels like paper, and the tomatoes are pale and watery. Pickles can be sharp and crunchy, but often you only get one or two. For a chain that markets itself as hearty and wholesome, the toppings fall flat. Price is another sticking point. A sandwich with chips and a drink can easily run you $12 to $15. At that price, you expect satisfaction. Instead, you are left with a sandwich that feels more like a snack than a meal. And for seniors or families trying to stretch their money, that is a real disappointment. Potbelly's charm is in the atmosphere. People enjoy the cozy vibe, the decor, the idea of comfort food done the old-fashioned way. But food should back up the charm, and here it does not. So tell me, do you think atmosphere can save a restaurant experience, or is it all about what actually ends up on your plate? Here's the spot with the paper bag gimmick that feels fun once but leaves you with uneven, forgettable sandwiches. Which? At first, which seems clever. You grab a paper bag, check off your toppings with a marker, and hand it over to the counter. It feels interactive, like you are designing your perfect sandwich. But once the novelty wears off, you realize the bag might be the best part of the whole experience. The bread is lackluster, often too dry or too chewy. It does not matter whether you choose white, wheat, or spinach wraps. None of them stand out. Instead of enhancing the sandwich, the bread feels like filler, holding everything together but adding nothing of value. The meats are no better. Turkey is bland, ham is salty, roast beef tastes like it has been sitting for days. Even when you try their specialty sandwiches, the protein is underwhelming. And because the portions are modest, the bread dominates every bite. You end up tasting more crust than filling. Toppings should be where which shines, since you can customize everything. But the quality just is not there. Lettuce is shredded and soggy, tomatoes are watery, and onions lack punch. Sauces like pesto, spicy mayonnaise, or ranch are meant to add flavor, but they often taste generic, like bottled dressings poured out without care. The biggest issue is inconsistency. Some locations are better than others, but too often the sandwiches come out uneven. One half might be loaded with toppings while the other is practically empty. For a chain that sells itself on customization, that is a frustrating experience. Prices range from $8 to $12, which would be fine if the food lived up to the promise. But when the highlight of the meal is filling out the paper bag, you know the gimmick has outshined the sandwich. So what do you think? Is a fun ordering system enough to make you return, or should the sandwich itself always be the star? And before we move to the good ones, here's the quirky chain with round bread that sounds unique but tastes more like novelty than nourishment. Schlotzsky's. Schlotzsky's has always tried to stand out by being different. Instead of the standard sub roll, their sandwiches come on round, spongy bread. At first glance, it feels fresh, maybe even exciting. Who does not want to try something a little different? But the novelty wears off quickly, and once it does, you are left with a sandwich that feels more gimmick than greatness. The bread is the first problem. It is spongy in a way that makes every bite feel more like eating cake than bread. Too thick, too soft, and too dominant. A sandwich should be about balance, the bread supporting the fillings without overwhelming them. At Schlotzsky's, the bread steals the show, and not in a good way. Then there are the toppings. You might order a roast beef sandwich and expect hearty slices of meat layered thick. Instead, you get thin, uninspired portions that disappear into the bread. Turkey, ham, chicken. They all taste generic, like they were pulled from a supermarket deli counter instead of being prepared with care. Cheese is sparse, vegetables are limp, and sauces feel like an afterthought. Even the specialty sandwiches and with the names that sound bold do not deliver. Pesto chicken, smoked turkey, Angus roast beef. All of them fall flat because the bread dominates and the toppings fail to shine. It is the sandwich equivalent of a song where the background noise is louder than the lead singer. Price does not help. Schlotzsky's is not the cheapest option around, with many sandwiches hitting $10 to $12. For that price, you want something memorable. Instead, what you get is a meal that feels heavy but not satisfying, bulky but not filling in the right way. The quirky round bread may draw in curious newcomers, but for regulars, it becomes a reason not to return. Schlotzsky's proves that different does not always mean better. So tell me, do you think a sandwich should stick to tradition, or do you enjoy chains that try unusual gimmicks like round bread? On the brighter side, here's the sub shop that still slices meat in front of you and stacks sandwiches worth every bite. Jersey Mike's. Jersey Mike's is a reminder of how good a simple sandwich can be when it is done right. Walk in and you can see the staff slicing the meat and cheese fresh as you order. There is something reassuring about watching your turkey or roast beef come straight off the slicer instead of out of a prepackaged stack. It feels authentic, and it tastes that way too. The bread is sturdy, soft on the inside, but with enough crust to hold everything together. It does not collapse under sauces or fillings, and it adds flavor without overwhelming the rest of the sandwich. White, wheat, or rosemary parmesan. They all have character, and they all make the fillings shine instead of hiding them. The real magic, though, comes with Mike's Way. It is a simple combination: onions, lettuce, tomatoes, oil, vinegar, and spices. But the way it comes together is unforgettable. The oil and vinegar soak just enough into the bread to give it tang, while the spices lift everything up. Add in the freshly sliced meat and cheese, and suddenly you have a sandwich that feels alive. Every bite has crunch, tang, freshness, and balance. The portions are generous, too. Where some chains skimp on meat, Jersey Mike's piles it high. A turkey and provolone actually tastes like turkey and provolone. A roast beef sub has real beef flavor, not just salt. And if you go for the Italian, you get layers of meats and cheese that taste like they were built with care. Yes, Jersey Mike's can cost more than other chains. A regular-sized sub often runs $10 to $12, and a giant easily crosses $15. But here's the difference: you leave satisfied. You leave feeling like the money was well spent, because the sandwich tastes like it came from a real deli instead of a conveyor belt. Jersey Mike's has built its reputation on doing the basics better than most. It is not flashy, it is not gimmicky, but it delivers, and sometimes that is exactly what you want. So here is the question: do you think simple, well-made food will always beat out flashy gimmicks? Or do you like chains that try to reinvent the wheel? And finally, closing on a high note, we have the supermarket deli legend that built a cult following with hearty bread and generous fillings: Publix deli subs. Publix might be a grocery store, but their deli subs have become famous in their own right. In many parts of the country, they are simply called pub subs, and fans will line up at the counter just to get one. They are not fancy, they are not loaded with gimmicks. They are just big, satisfying sandwiches made the way a sub should be. The bread is a strong foundation, soft enough to bite through easily, but sturdy enough to hold up under layers of meat, cheese, and vegetables. Toast it, and you get an added crunch that takes it to another level. It feels like the kind of bread you would expect from a bakery, not a supermarket. The fillings are where Publix really shines. Turkey subs come with thick slices of turkey that actually taste fresh. Roast beef has flavor and texture, not just salt. And the Italian subs are loaded with layers of meat and cheese that feel indulgent but balanced. Vegetables are crisp and colorful, from bright lettuce and juicy tomatoes to sharp onions and crunchy pickles. Add in condiments like mayonnaise, mustard, or oil and vinegar, and the whole thing comes together perfectly. One of the best things about Publix deli subs is customization. You can build them your way, piling on extra toppings, doubling up on cheese, or trying out one of their specialty combos. And unlike many chains, the staff usually builds your sandwich with care, making sure every bite has balance. Price is another win. For around $10 to $12, you get a sub that feels like a full meal. It is hearty, generous, and satisfying in a way that many fast casual chains fail to match. And because Publix is a grocery store, you can grab chips, drinks, or even dessert from the bakery to round it all out. Publix deli subs are proof that a great sandwich does not need a flashy theme or clever branding. All it takes is fresh bread, quality ingredients, and care in how it is put together. So tell me, have you ever been surprised by how good the food was at a place that was not even a restaurant? And that wraps up our bite through the best and worst of sandwich chains. So drop your own go-to sub spot in the comments, hit like if you have ever been betrayed by soggy bread, and subscribe to the hidden menu for more food stories served fresh.
And remember, the truth is not always on the menu.